The Second Portuguese India Armada was assembled in 1500 on the order of King Manuel I of Portugal and placed under the command of Pedro Álvares Cabral. Cabral's armada famously discovered Brazil for the Portuguese crown along the way. By and large, the Second Armada's diplomatic mission to India failed, and provoked the opening of hostilities between the Kingdom of Portugal and the feudal city-state of Calicut, ruled by Zamorins. Nonetheless, it managed to establish a factory in nearby Cochin Kingdom, the first Portuguese factory in Asia. Fleet, the First India Armada, commanded by Vasco da Gama, arrived in Portugal in the summer of 1499 in a rather sorry shape. Battles, disease and storms had taken their toll. Half of his ships and men had been lost, although he came back with a hefty cargo of spices that would be sold at an enormous profit. The Vasco da Gama had failed in the principal objective of his mission, negotiating a treaty with Zamorins Calicut, the spice entrepot on the Malabar coast of India. Nonetheless, Gama had opened up the sea route to India via the Cape of Good Hope and secured good relations with the African city-state of Malindi, a critical staging post along the way. On the orders of King Manuel I of Portugal, arrangements immediately began to assemble a second armada in Cascais, determined not to repeat Gama's mistakes. This one was to be a large and well-armed fleet, 13 ships, 1,500 men, and laden with valuable gifts and diplomatic letters to win over the potentates of the East. Many details of the composition of the fleet are missing. Only 3 ship names are known, and there is some conflict among the sources on the naming of the captains. The following list of ships should not be regarded as authoritative but a tentative list compiled from various conflicting accounts. This list is principally in concordance with Fernão Lopes de Castanheda's Historia, João de Barros's Décadas, Damião de Goes's Chronica, the marginal gloss of the Relação das Naus, Diogo de Couto's list, Manuel de Faria e Sousa's Asia Portuguesa. The main conflict is with Gaspar Correa's Lendas da India, who omits Pero de Ratide and Aras Gomes da Silva, listing instead Braz Matoso and Pedro de Figueiredo, and introduces André Goncalves in addition to Lemos, bringing the number of captains up to 14, but manages to bring it back down to 13 by identifying Simão de Miranda as vice-admiral and captain of Cabral's own flagship. Neither of the 2 eyewitnesses, the anonymous Portuguese pilot and Pero Vaz de Caminha, give a list of captains. The Second Armada would be headed by the Portuguese nobleman Pedro Álvares Cabral, a Master of the Order of Christ. Cabral had no notable naval or military experience, his appointment as Capitão-Mor of the Armada being largely a political one. The exiled Castilian nobleman Sancho de Tovar was designated vice-admiral and successor should anything befall Cabral. Veteran pilot Pedro Escobar was given the overall technical command of the expedition. Other veterans of the First Armada include Captain Nicolau Coelho, pilot Pero de Alencar, clerks Afonso Lopes and João de Sá. Going as captains were the famed navigator Bartolomeu Diaz and his brother Diogo Diaz. Most of the ships were either carracks or caravels, and at least one was a small supply ship, although details on names and tonnage are missing. At least 2 ships, Cabral's flagship and Tovar's El Rey, were said to be around 240 t, that is, about twice the size of the largest ship in the First Armada of Vasco da Gama. 10 ships were destined for Calicut, while 2 ships were destined for Sofala and 1 was destined to be scuttled and burnt along the way. At least 2 ships were privately owned and outfitted. The ship of Luis Perez was owned by Diogo da Silva y Meneses, Count of Portalegre, while the Annunciada of Nuno Leitão da Cunha was owned by the king's cousin D. Alvaro of Braganza, and financed by an Italian consortium composed of the Florentine bankers Bartolomeo Marchioni and Girolamo Cernighi and the Genoese Antonio Salvago. The remainder belonged to the Portuguese crown. Accompanying the expedition as translator was Gaspar da Gama, as well as 4 Hindu hostages from Zamorins' kingdom taken by da Gama in 1498 during negotiations. Also aboard is the ambassador of the Sultan of Malindi, who had come with Gama and was now set to return. Other passengers on the expedition included Aurélio Correa, designated factor for Calicut, his secretary Pedro Álvares Cabral.Cabral, Sofala factor Afonso Furtado and clerk Martinho Neto. Accompanying the trip was the royal physician and amateur astronomer Master João Fares, who brought along the latest astrolabe and new Arab astronomical staves for navigational experiment. One chronicler suggests that the knight Duarte Pacheco Pereira was also aboard. The fleet carried some 20 Portuguese degradados, who could fulfill the sentences by being abandoned along the shores of various places and exploring inland on the crown's behalf. Among the degradados we know 4 names: Afonso Ribeiro, João Machado, Luís de Moura, Antonio Fernandes. Finally, the fleet carried the first Portuguese Christian missionaries to India, 8 Franciscan friars and 8 chaplains, under the supervision of the head chaplain Fr. Enrique Soares of Coimbra. There are 3 surviving eyewitness accounts of this expedition. An extended letter written by Pedro Álvares Cabral, written from Brazil on May 1, 1500, to King Manuel I. The brief letter by Mestre João Fares to the king, also from Brazil. The account of an anonymous Portuguese pilot, first published in Italian in 1507. Mission. Cabral's instructions were several-fold. The priority was to secure a treaty with Zamorins' Calicut, the principal commercial entrepot of the Kerala spice trade and dominant feudal city-state on the Malabar coast of India. Calicut had been visited by Vasco da Gama's first armada in 1498, but failed to impress the elderly ruling Manivakraman Raja Zamorin of Calicut, and no agreements had been signed. Cabral's instructions were precisely to succeed where Gama had failed, and to this end was entrusted with magnificent gifts to present to the Zamorin. Cabral was under orders to establish a feitoria in Calicut, to be placed under Aurélio Correa, the designated factor for Calicut. The second priority, assigned to the brothers Bartolomeu Diaz and Diogo Diaz, was to search out the East African port of Sofala, near the mouth of the Zambezi River. Sofala had been secretly visited and described by the explorer Pedro da Covilhã during his overland expedition a decade earlier, and he identified it as the end point of the Monomotapa gold trade. The Portuguese crown was eager to tap into that gold source, but Gama's armada had failed to find it. The Diaz brothers were instructed to find and establish a factory at Sofala under designated factor Afonso Furtado. To this end, instructions were probably also given to secure the consent of Quilwa, the dominant city-state of the East African coast and putative overlord of Sofala. Like Sofala, Quilwa had been visited by Covilhã, but overlooked by Gama. A minor objective included the delivery of a group of Franciscan missionaries to India. It is said that Vasco da Gama had misinterpreted the Hinduism he saw practiced in India as a form of primitive Christianity. He believed its peculiar characteristics were a result of centuries of separation opposition from the mainstream church in Europe. Gama recommended that missionaries be sent to India to help bring the practices of the Hindu Church up to date with Roman Catholic orthodoxy. To this end, a group of Franciscan friars, led by Fr. Enrique Soares of Coimbra, joined the expedition. Finally, the Second Armada was also a commercial spice run. The Crown and private merchants who had outfitted the ships expected full cargoes of spices to return to Lisbon. Suspected Brazilian mission. There has been some controversial debate over whether Pedro Álvares Cabral also had secret instructions from King Manuel I to lay claim to the land mass of Brazil, or more precisely, to swing as far west as possible to the Tordesillas line, and claim whatever lands or islands might be discovered there for the Portuguese crown, before the Spanish did. This claim is largely speculative. There is no evidence of any such instructions, and various reasons to presume them unlikely. Spanish explorers had certainly been tending south lately. Christopher Columbus had touched the coast of the South American mainland in 1498, on his third trip. In late 1499, Alonso de Ojeda had discovered much of the Venezuelan coast with one of his squadrons, under Amerigo Vespucci, exploring parts of what is now northern Brazil. In early 1500, Vicente Yanez Pinzon and Diego de Lepe, via generous southerly swings from the Canary Islands, had reached at least what is now modern Ceará, perhaps as far east as Cape of Santo Agostinho, and explored much of the northern Brazilian coast west of it. It is possible that the southerly Spanish tendencies were deliberate, aimed at securing more land for the Spanish crown. However, these Spanish expeditions were much too recent for the results to have been known in Lisbon before Cabral's departure in March 1500. It is very doubtful that the Portuguese were aware of them, and, even if they were, it would not seem sensible to deviate Cabral's large and heavy Second Armada on an important mission to India, to pursue some open-ended exploratory work in unknown waters, that could have been far more efficiently accomplished by a couple of little caravels. Outward journey. March 9, 1500. Cabral's expedition, the Second India Armada of 13 ships, sets out from the Tagus. March 22, 1500. Cabral's Armada reaches Cape Verde Island of São Nicolau in the middle of a storm. The privately outfitted ship of Luis Perez is too damaged by the tempest to continue, and returns to Lisbon. Makes no mention of Perez and instead reports that it was the crown ship of Vasco da Tide was lost around Cape Verde. From Cape Verde, Cabral strikes southwest. The reasons for this unusual direction have been speculated upon endlessly. The most probable hypothesis is that Cabral was simply following the wide arc in the South Atlantic to catch a favorable wind to carry them to the Cape of Good Hope. How did Cabral know about this arc? The most probable answer is that this was precisely the route followed by Vasco da Gama on his first trip in 1497. The veterans of the First Fleet, notably the pilots Pero de Alenc and Pedro Escobar, would very likely have charted the same route for Cabral again. Indeed, in the Lisbon archives, there is a draft of a document based on Gama and intended for Cabral that gives the essential instruction to strike in a southwesterly direction when he reaches the doldrums. The difference is that this time the arc was a little wider. Cabral went further west than Gama had, and as a result hit upon the hitherto unknown land mass of Brazil. Alternative hypotheses forwarded for Cabral striking southwest have been that Cabral was trying to reach the Azores to repair his storm-battered fleet that he was searching for and rounding up missing tempest-tossed ships. The hypothesis, already considered above, that it was an intentional attempt to discover if there was any land by the Tordesillas Line. Discovery of Brazil, April 21, 1500. After nearly 30 days of sailing, on April 21, Cabral's fleet finds the first indications of nearby land. April 22, 1500, Cabral's armada sights the Brazilian coast, seeing the outlines of a hill they name Monte Pascoal. April 23, 1500, the armada anchors at the mouth of the Frade River and a group of local Tupiniquim Indians assembles on the beach. Cabral dispatches a small party, headed by Nicolau Coelho, in a long boat ashore to make first contact. Coelho tosses his hat in exchange for a feathered headdress, but the surf is too strong for a proper landing and opening of communication, and so they return to the ships. April 23-24, 1500, strong overnight winds on prompt the armada to lift anchor and sail some 10 leagues north, finding harbour behind the reef at Cabralha Bay, just north of Porto Seguro. The pilot Afonso Lopes goes sounding in a rowboat. He spies a native canoe, captures the 2 Indians on board, and brings them back to ship. The language barrier prevents questioning, but they are fed and given cloth and beads. The cultural differences were staggering. Fed with honey and cake, they spit them out and were deeply surprised with the sight of a chicken. April 25, 1500, the next day a party led by Nicolau Coelho and Bartolomeu Diaz goes ashore, accompanied by the 2 natives. Armed Tupiniquim warily approach the beach, but on a signal from the 2 natives, lay down the bows, and allow the Portuguese to land and collect water. April 26, 1500, Franciscan Fra Enrique Soares of Coimbra goes ashore to celebrate Mass, curiously watched by some 200 Tupiniquim Indians. It is the first known Christian Mass on the American mainland. For much of the week, interaction between the Portuguese and the Tupiniquim gradually increases. There is a brisk trade in European iron nails, cloth, beads and crucifixes in return for American amulets, spears, parrots and monkeys. There is only the slightest hint that precious metals might be found in the hinterlands. Portuguese degradados are assigned to spend the night in Tupiniquim villages, while the remainder of the crews sleep aboard ships. May 1, 1500, Pedro Álvares Cabral makes preparations to resume the journey to India. The Portuguese pilots, assisted by the physician astronomer Master João Fares and his astronomical instruments, determine that the land lies east of the Tordesillas Line, prompting Pedro Álvares Cabral to formally claim Brazil for the Portuguese crown, bestowing upon it the name of Ilha de Vera Cruz. On May 2, 1500, Cabral dispatches the supply ship back to Lisbon, with the Brazilian items and a letter to King Manuel I of Portugal composed by the secretary Pero Vaz de Caminha to announce the discovery. It also carries a separate private letter to the king from Master João Fares, in which he identifies the main guiding constellation in the southern hemisphere, the Southern Cross. The supply ship will arrive in Lisbon in June. May 3, 1500, leaving behind a couple of Portuguese degradados with the Tupiniquim of Porto Seguro, Cabral orders the 11 remaining ships to set sail and continue on the route to India. Crossing to India. Late May 1500, after crossing the Atlantic Ocean, Cabral's armada reaches the Cape of Good Hope. The fleet faces headlong winds for 6 straight days. 4 ships are lost at sea in the process. Most tragically, the Cephala destined ship of Bartolomeu Diaz, the famous navigator, the first to round the Cape back in 1488, fatally fails to round it this time. The 3 others of the Crown-owned ships of Aras Gomes da Silva, Simão da Pena and Vasco da Atide. In any case, the fleet is reduced to 7 ships. Facing strong winds, the 7 split into smaller groups, to meet again on the other side. Cabral holds 2 ships together with his own. June 16, 1500, Cabral's battered three-ship squadron reaches the Primeras Islands. Two local merchant ships, catching sight of Cabral, take flight. Cabral gives pursuit. One of them runs aground and the other is captured. Questioning quickly determines that these ships are owned by a cousin of the Sultan Fatima of Malindi, so they are released without harm. June 22, 1500, Cabral's three-ship squadron hobble on to Mozambique Island. Despite the earlier quarrel with Gama, Cabral is given an unexpectedly warm reception by the Sultan of Mozambique, and allowed to collect water and supplies. Shortly after, three more ships of the Second Armada sail into Mozambique Island and make junction with Cabral. Only the ship of Diogo Diaz remains missing. As Diaz's mission was for Sofala anyway, Cabral decides not to wait for it but rather to press on with his current fleet of 6 ships. July 26, 1500, Cabral's armada reaches the city-state of Kilwa, the dominant city of the East African coast. Afonso Furtado, who had been appointed factor for Sofala back in Lisbon and mercifully escaped death, goes ashore to open negotiations with the strongman ruler Emir Ibrahim. A meeting is arranged between Cabral and Emir Ibrahim, conducted on a couple of rowboats in Kilwa harbour. Cabral presents a letter from King Manuel I proposing a treaty, but Emir Ibrahim is suspicious and, for all the formal pleasantries, resistant to the overtures. Cabral, feeling there's nothing to be achieved here and worried about missing the monsoon winds to India, decides to break off the negotiations and sail on. August 2, 1500, pressing north, the Cabral fleet avoid hostile Mombasa and finally reach friendly Malindi. He drops off the Malindi ambassador the Gama had taken the previous year. The Sultan of Malindi gives Cabral an excellent reception, leaving behind 2 degradados and picking up 2 Gujarati pilots. Cabral's 6-ship armada finally begins its Indian Ocean crossing on August 7.